Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 73 of the Trauma Dump Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump Podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own, and how do I support others? This week, we'll be discussing the topic of how to become a better man with our very special guest of the week, Ron. You can go follow Ron over on Instagram. His Instagram is The Recovering Nomad. That is TheRecoveringnomad. So please go follow Ron and support him on this amazing journey of healing his masculinity. And hey, if you'd like to share on the podcast, please message us in our Discord and the podcast participants channel along with your unique experiences, and we will match you to the right episode. And just a quick disclaimer before we start. I am not a licensed health professional. This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these topics that are so often overlooked and extremely misunderstood. If you or a loved one are in need of medical professional help, we have so many different resources in our descriptions. The topics discussed here are for a mature audience, so viewer discretion is always advised. And happy 2025, everybody. Oh my goodness, we have made it into 2025. I'm in shock that I have existed this long. I don't know about you, but with the recent political events and everything that's going on in our world, it's been pretty crazy. It's been pretty crazy. And if you guys are suffering from seasonal depression, like I'm suffering from seasonal depression or seasonal affective disorder, yeah, I don't like the cold months. I don't like the lack of sunshine. I love sunshine. So that's why it's like been really important for me to get out and go outside with my dogs. That has been super beneficial. So I couldn't recommend that more if you guys are also suffering from seasonal affective disorder. And hey, if you guys want to support the podcast and maybe make me feel a little better, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content here from the podcast. And if you know someone that might also like the podcast, please share it with your friends. That would really help us out a lot. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, you know what would also be great? If you rated the show. No matter what you think the show deserves, a rating really helps us reach out more people. According to Spotify Wrapped, we have increased like the amount of people that have listened to this podcast 700% since the last year. So that's also been crazy. I don't know how many people that is because Spotify doesn't give an exact number, but the amount of people that are actively downloading the episode is also crazy. So that also helps us out a lot. Thank you so much for listening and being on this journey with us on the Trauma Dump Podcast. All right, let's get into this episode talking about how to become a better man. Okay. Hi, Ron. Welcome to the podcast.
How's it going?
I am so happy. I'm so happy that you're here. You're famous in my realm, so it's very
Oh,
exciting.
thank you for having me on, and having the discussion that we're going to have today.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So, before we get into it, I just want to give the disclaimer. I'm not a licensed health professional, neither is Ron. We are just people that have gone through trauma and like to share our experiences to make it less stigmatizing to talk about mental health and trauma. Also, before we start the interview, what are your pronouns, Ron?
Oh, he, him. His,
Awesome.
his would be the third one. Yeah. How about you?
uh, huh?
How about you?
I am they, them, she, her. I prefer they, them, but everyone perceives me as girl. So it's like vibes. Either way, it's vibes.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Are you comfortable with discussing your personal experiences?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about them. I don't know how comfortable I feel about it. It's definitely some uncomfort in it, but yeah.
Okay, to make sure that I'm not crossing any of your boundaries and respecting your experiences, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. We can also take a break. And if you don't feel like answering a question, just let me know. I will skip it. We'll keep trekking along because my priority is to make sure that you feel safe sharing.
Sure, that sounds great. Thank you.
So today we're talking about becoming a better man. What does it mean to you to become a better man?
Mm, I think a big piece for me would just be removing the gender from it. You know, what is it for me to be a better human and to show up in a way that is um, meaningful and thoughtful and present, and to see all the little bits and pieces of what it means to be a person, to have compassion for them, in a world that is so quick to judge. That's what I learned how to do very early on, and to go through and cause some of the pain and harm that I've been a part of, either experienced or done. To come out on the other side, there's a bit of compassion of, oh wow, I can see where somebody can make mistakes. It's not an excuse, but I can also understand where those things happen, and that there is also a space to grow that we don't often discuss too much as a society.
Yeah. I don't think we discuss like this being able to grow as often as we probably should. I think a lot of people want to hold others accountable or whatever they perceive as holding someone else accountable. But once that person is held accountable, they want to keep having that label on that person and not allow them to move past that and to metamorphosize. I like to think of, butterflies and moths. Their cocoons, getting out of that cocoon itself is very traumatic. And most butterflies and moths don't actually make it out of their cocoon because they've encased themselves so heavily and also outside circumstances of, something picking at it to try and eat it. But once you have gotten through that trauma and gotten to the other side, you still have to live, you still have to function. And it's almost like the world's like, no, you're still a caterpillar. No, you're still a caterpillar. No, you're still a caterpillar to me. And I find it very difficult, very, very difficult. Especially since I feel like I am metamorphosizing in a way as well as I get older and no longer want to be associated with maybe past beliefs that I have had or even past identities that I have had. Because I was raised very religious, very, very religious, very purity culture. And if little me would see me right now living in a house with a man, and I'm not yet married. Oh, little me would be so judgmental. Little me would be clutching her pearls, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you. And it's it's a lot of judgment and resentment that we put onto ourselves as well. It isn't just the world. I think we're our biggest judges. What do you think to that? To my little analogy?
Mm, yeah, I am at constant war with my inner critic. No matter how much I focus on really understanding the depth of what I have gone through or what I've been a part of, um, it will always come back to that. There's always that. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'll just wake up like, oh man, the guilt and shame from mistakes, or even some other thing to stress about. I'm either ruminating about the past or I am stressing out about the future. It's so difficult to be present, be here and now. And no matter what anybody else does, the rest of the world has a tendency to move on. And it's difficult, especially so I'm neurodivergent. I'm severely ADHD and also on the autism spectrum, which is something I found out along the way to healing of things that I wasn't taking care of about myself. And um, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which many of your listeners have probably heard of before and maybe understand, is the idea that it's difficult to take any sort of criticism as something that is changeable, but as it's inherently me. I'm not guilty of something. I have shame for something. I am the problem, not I do have a problem that I can fix. And working to do that is one of the biggest pieces of work that I am no longer the man that I was. In fact, I don't even know that me and him would get along. Me at 25, who I am, 43, or even me, 3.5 years ago when I first got sober.
Speaking on your sobriety, we're kind of like dancing around the things
Hmm.
that you've gone through.
Sure.
Can you share more about the moment you realized something had to change?
Yeah. It's happened a number of times, but just for the people that I cause pain, I won't say too much detail, but I had made a series of choices, but it had to do a lot with drugs and alcohol, since we're talking about the sobriety part of it. And I was causing harm to other people with my actions, saying inappropriate things, doing inappropriate things, and that had at its core been a part of so many fears. It was unresolved trauma. It was not understanding the mental illnesses I had. There was all these things. It's not an excuse. I needed to know in that moment, like, I can't fucking live like this anymore. I can't do this. I am, what people referred to as I was being canceled. And it wasn't, it was facing accountability for what I was causing. And it was, there's not a clear path for many on what to do next when we realize that, especially for men, especially when that's the script that we've been given. Like, script as in, this is the way it's written, but also like a prescription. Like, this is what it means to be a man. This is the man box. All these things we can't do. Don't do this. Don't ask for help. Don't. That dehumanize us and make us less than. And it's something that, Bell Hooks talks about in a number of her books, A Will to Change, which is, if you haven't read that yet, any men that are listening, please do yourself a favor and read that book. It's going to open your eyes to a lot of stuff, I feel. And to understand that I am a part of the problem and I need to be accountable for that. And then to look back, zoom out and see how much of the problem is a system, a patriarchal system, that I am showing up in my own patriarchy and I am showing up in my own like mind of, of a colonizer and these kind of things. How do I take that all in and say, I can't be this anymore? And for a lot of people, when they get sober, it is an AA program. I do not believe in any higher power like you. It sounds like you've probably had a deconstruction of your religion and faith. I am probably what I would call an anti-theist. I think that we are at a point that we no longer need it. I think that there's a lot to that. That's a totally different conversation. But for me, when I first started looking at ways to get sober, it didn't make sense for me to go to AA. Because the second rule is I got to give it over to somebody. Like, no, I want to know that I can have control over this thing. I can't just give it up to something. I need to figure out tools. So I used a program called Smart Recovery, which is self-management and recovery therapy. And it is peer-to-peer instead of being more of the idea of having something that we go to and it's giving all this other stuff up. It's tools, it's toolbox. How do I make sure that I don't make these same mistakes? Similar to CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. If you haven't utilized that or don't know what that is, um, people listening at home, it's just a way to, we have a thought becomes a feeling, the feeling becomes an action. How do I find the space in between those things before a thought becomes a feeling that hurts me, that makes me do something that is going to harm myself or others, or it can be the opposite direction. So for me, it was finding these tools to be able to do it, and that eventually led me to men's work, which was something that was the fundamental change for me. So yeah, I think that answered the question. I hope it did.
That was a beautiful, well-rounded answer, and I really appreciate it. And you said that you're neurodivergent. I am also neurodivergent. I have severe ADHD, and I also have dyslexia. And
Yeah,
I
same.
really Vibes. Ah, we see each other. I really resonate with the way that you elaborate and expand upon your entire thought process. And it is very helpful for me to understand. And I'm sure all the other listeners who are also neurospicy are like, yes, give me
Yeah.
all the information. So I just want to really ap appreciate the way that you spoke about that. I do have a question though about men's work. Could you
Mhm.
please describe to us what men's work is?
Mm. I think there are a lot of different programs that approach it in different ways. I'm a part of a number of different groups, and men's work is for me deconstructing the messages that we got. We as men are socialized from a very young age. Everybody is socialized from a young age of what it is to be a man, to be a woman. And then eventually we get to break these things down with our understanding of gender, that there's two and beyond. If we take the time to dive into that. Um, but yeah, it's what's referred to as the man box that I mentioned earlier, and it's a list of things that you can find on a website called A Call to Men.org, which was one of the first programs that I did when I got sober. And the breakdown is how were we socialized? What it is it to be a man, man up, cowboy up. Don't be this, don't be that. We all know what those words are that I'm not saying there. And it's normally a rejection of the feminine. And so it's breaking those pieces down and saying, I, as a human being, have a spectrum of feelings. I have the worth without having to produce things. I have people that I can ask for help, and it is not weak to do that. That strength is not something that is just physical. That is what we're taught, that there are emotions beyond anger and lust and these other things. And that beneath all those things, that as a man, I personally showed up as in only a few ways, were other things. The anger that came out when I was drunk to people that were in my close circle, sometimes that I often didn't remember because I was blacked out drunk, were the wounds from my childhood that I had never healed, the bullying that I had never really taken any sort of time to go over, um, and work through and process what had happened to me, the sexual abuse that I went through when I was younger, and how that made me close off my sexuality, and then to go from that guy that had never been on a date or kissed a girl that ended up working at a strip club as a DJ at 19 years old at the coolest club in town. How did all these things from my youth lead into the the choices that I made to show up as a man instead of a full, complete human? Um, and so men's work has allowed me to take a look at those things in a number of different ways through processes, through sitting in a circle with men that I could trust. And that was a difficult thing in and of itself because um, I think if most men were honest with themselves, if they were sitting alone in a room with nobody else to tell, that they would choose the bear too, because I was bullied by men, I was abused by men. My father that wasn't there was a man. I don't know what happened with him and my mom, but I know my mom didn't want to talk about him. Why not? All these things, the lessons I learned were that men were unsafe. And to have trust in men again and to have trust in myself again, I needed examples of that. And men's work allowed me to see that by sitting in a circle and talking to men that were doing the work and saying, I am so much more than what the world told me I could be.
That's very beautiful. That is truly very beautiful. And I'm very glad that you found that healing and that resilience within yourself and within others and found other people to hold you accountable continually. And it sounds like you also hold other men accountable as well.
Yeah, and I think there's the social media term of accountable and what the world does in what is often, I'm not saying about this about my experience, but I mean overall, is that we've become a society of recreational outrage being a pastime. And I still do this myself. The recent election in particular was a very difficult one. It made me physically ill. I didn't get out of bed the next day. I was so depressed by it in the US, for those that are listening elsewhere. And for me, it was just such a God, I thought we weren't this anymore. I thought we were so much better. And so for me, being able to be accountable for something is just the first step in a path towards saying, I made mistakes. I did these things. I made these choices, and I know that that hurt other people, and it damn near killed me. I mean, the event that happened was 4 months after I almost died from COVID. And the reason why COVID almost killed me was because the previous 15 plus years of drug and alcohol use, working in a very stressful environment where I was never going to be enough. And that was just, a part of going back even further, the stuff that I dropped out of high school. I quit high school when I was 17 years old because of all the bullying and stuff that I was going through there. And everything led back to something. All of it led back to my injured little boy. And to be accountable is to say, I know that there is consequences for my actions. And now what can I do to make sure that those things don't happen again? And then from that, how can I then show up in the world to help make sure that doesn't happen with others? Either that I am someone that other men in my life or other people in my life can find a space to talk to about what's going on with them and figure out how to create a world where those things happen less. Less people suffer from poverty, less, fewer people are indoctrinated into patriarchal ways of thinking, any of these ways that can then just make the world safer for all of us.
I like you saying make the world safer for all of us because I think what really inspired me to heal myself and then also make this podcast is when I was going through really severe trauma of losing my father, losing my grandfathers, both of them, becoming homeless. I had no one to talk to. And everyone I tried to talk to thought of me as a burden or thought of me as exaggerating. I would get told that I was exaggerating or that they didn't believe me because there's no way all of that could happen. It sounds like a movie. And it's like, I'm not exaggerating. I could go into further detail, let me tell you, but I wasn't exaggerating. And that constant fear of rejection by other people and isolation within that circumstance, I was like, you know what? I am pretty damn sure there are other people out there who feel the same thing I do right now. And so I made a Discord and I made it anonymous. And then I made the podcast just talk, have like a space where I could say what was going on in my brain and tell other people. And it just grew and grew and grew. And it helped me because I was able to share openly what I was going through. And then I learned tools from each and every person that came on and shared their experiences. And I also went to therapy and I went to group therapy. And with each and every interaction, I learned how to talk about my trauma in a way that was mutually beneficial for the other person, that didn't feel like I was burdening them with my problems. Because a lot of people, when they hear someone talking about trauma, they're like, how am I supposed to fix this for you? Sometimes I don't want them to fix it for me. I just want someone to acknowledge my pain. And that's what a lot of people just want is there's so many outside circumstances like, oh, you're making this up. Oh, we don't believe you. Oh, you're trying to get clout, what have you. Just to sit with another person's pain and the uncomfortability of it can be all the healing someone else needs to be able to move forward. Because it's that acknowledgement of, I see you, I see what you've gone through, and just sitting with it helped me more than anyone trying to solve my problem because I could solve my own problem. I just needed someone to recognize that there was a problem and that it was shitty that I was going through it. It was shitty that I was abandoned. It was shitty that I had no way of getting out of it for a while. Just sitting with that, this is shitty right now, rather than repressing it and be like, oh, everything's going to be better eventually. Oh, it's just going to be fine. Oh, look on the bright side, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes we just got to sit with this is shitty. And I think for me, that's the acknowledgement that helped me hold me accountable. Because when I think of accountability, I think of acknowledging what's happening and not deluding myself to something else. I am a very realistic person. I don't like seeing the bright side of the situation and I don't like seeing the negative of the situation. I like trying to understand every single aspect of the situation so I have a full picture. And so for me, sometimes it can be triggering if somebody is just like, oh, look on the bright side. And then it can also be triggering for me if someone's like, oh, you have such a horrible life. Like you have it so much worse than me because it's like, girl, I'm not even trying to compare. I'm just trying to exist. And it gets frustrating, you know? And I think that's part of neurodivergence is just some, especially people that are not neurodivergent, not being able to sit with that uncomfortable feeling. It's like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Let me just go to something else. Let me just move on to the next thing. And for me, so much of my life was just being uncomfortable with everything that was happening and getting accommodations was a battle within itself, but it wasn't to put me at a higher advantage than other people. It was just to put me on the same level. And that was also something that a lot of people didn't understand. And I want to ask you, how did therapy and receiving mental health diagnoses change the way that you saw yourself and your actions?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to ask you to ask me that question again in a minute because there's definitely some questions that I have for you from what you just shared. One, thank you for sharing what you did and what you're doing with the podcast, and um, to understand what it is for us as not neurodivergent people, the way that we communicate and say things is often very different from neurotypical folks, and it's just to understand that all of us have ways of doing that and that I could and do often overshare. Or as I've become more comfortable in talking about these things because it's the work that I do week after week, multiple meetings a week, and I'm talking to different people about it, it's very easy for me to talk about things that can be uncomfortable for others. And just the point that you mentioned so often with guys, we just want to solve the problem. I love this person in front of me. They are suffering through something, and I'm wanting to figure out a solution. And so that's the first thing that I go to, and learning that I need to stop and say, do you just need somebody to witness this? Or do you want to figure some stuff out? Do you just need me to be here and just to get it out so that way it's not in your head anymore? Asking those questions, so that way we can feel, I think one of the most powerful things I've ever felt, and still to this day, was the person that I was in love with. Well, sure, we said we loved each other, but it was her saying, I see you, and feeling that it was I understand all these different things that make up you, the things that I love and the things that drive me crazy. And I see you for it and I see those reasons why. And I'm happy that you had that experience. So did you have a sort of aha moment with this where you said or felt I'm not alone in this? What was the time that made you feel like, oh, this is not only something that's of value to me, but to others that led you to continue on the course you're on right now?
I think I really I appreciate you saying like as a man because I think that's also conditioning for men to solve the problem. I don't think that's just inherent. I think that's
Yeah.
conditioning. Because that was one of the biggest challenges that Joey, my fiance, and I really had to approach in premarital counseling was his inability to witness when I was upset and try to fix whatever I was upset about. And he got to unpack it and he was like, well, whenever there was a problem, I was always told, figure it out, fix it. I was never allowed to just have a problem. Like, I had to figure it out and fix it as soon as possible, or else something bad would happen. And it was like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen if I'm upset? And he's like, well, you leaving me. I'm like, well, but I'm not gonna, where am I gonna go? Like, I'm not gonna leave you. I love you. I want to figure things out together, but I need to be able to be sad. And that was really beneficial for us growing together and learning how to cope. And it also helped something in his brain of being like, I can just be upset. And he got to hold more space for when he was upset and be able to create boundaries within our relationship of whenever he came home and he's had a stressful day, he's like, I don't need to be touched. I need to shower. I have been plumbing. I need to shower, feel better, and then we can touch and reconnect. And that was very hard for me. I'm a very touch oriented person, very tactile in general. And so he was like, well, I feel gross and I don't want to make you gross because, plumbing, sewers,
Yeah.
grossness. So
Yeah.
that was like, oh, so you're not just, I don't want to be touched right now. There's multifaceted to this, I don't want to be touched right now. And that also really helped us because he was able to communicate that rather than feeling like, oh, I have to placate Grace right now, which could cause resentment further down the line. And that was really beneficial for me as well because he is also neurodivergent. And we had to uncover that together because he felt like I'm not allowed to be neurodivergent because as a man that's seen as weakness or as a man that's less than if you are neurodivergent. Could you speak to that of why patriarchy sees that as less than?
Oh, absolutely. And I think some of the things just kind of reflect on what you were talking about is, with what Joey was doing with you. And for those at home, I did not realize until just a few minutes before we started this that I had sit in a circle with her fiance. And Joey's a wonderful guy that's doing a lot of great work. And he's so kind and he's sweet and he's thoughtful, especially for as young as he is. And it's just it fits now that I know. But the part of the message is we're supposed to provide and protect. That is our value as men in the world, is to provide and protect. And in a world that doesn't need us or that doesn't have a value for that as much as it used to, when we grew up with that message, what do we do now? And I think that's where I've got to figure out what my value is. What am I, if I'm protecting you, I should be protecting you from me not taking care of myself and showing up in a way that's, you know, harmful. And if I'm, providing, I should be providing a space where the person in front of me feels they can bring all this stuff to me, and talk about it. And, getting into the neurodivergency and accepting that it was a joke growing up. People made fun of it. My mom told me that she had gotten me tested, and I struggle to believe that now. I have gone to a couple of different people that were like, What do you mean when you were young they told you you didn't have it? I hit every marker, every single one. I hit at the extreme level of every marker on medication. And the thought that I would need help, that in a sense, much of this can be a disability with the things that we deal with. And as a man, I am always supposed to be confident and I'm always supposed to be competent. And to know that there are things I struggle with that I just outright ignored and I medicated. Alcohol turns off a lot of the shit with neurodivergency. Cocaine helps a lot with the focus on stuff. There's a lot of these things that I was self-medicating, and instead of using good tools, I was doing things that was harming me and harming those around me because of the way that I would show up. I was fine early in the evening. You don't want to hang out with me at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm just gone. And that is something that instead of being able to face that and say, this is something that I can find tools for, and this is something that I don't have to be ashamed of. Patriarchy would tell me to shut up, be a man, and not talk about it. And deconstructing and separating myself away from that, unplugging myself from the matrix of masculinity, as I like to call it, and stepping out from that and being, this is just how I am. There's nothing wrong with that. I am okay the way I am, and I can learn ways that maybe that can be a lot, and step away from it. And also that I need to take space for myself. When my spoons are gone, go home. And it used to be I would drink through that and I would drug through that and I would use whatever it was that I had to get through those things. And now I'm just like, I got to take care of myself. This is too much for me. My stimulation is overboard and I need to go back. But the patriarchy will have us forcing so many things upon ourselves that are perfectly human to feel. And um, recognizing that and saying, oh, like this is a moment I need to be paying attention to because this will lead me down the path of doing all the things that harm me, like binge eating. For me, I've got a list. There's a laundry list of things that will show up. Binge watching TV, whatever the thing that I'll do to soothe myself when that stuff is too much. So yeah, it is like everything else, patriarchy makes everything worse.
Hmm. I think it's really interesting how you were talking about the provide, protect, something that I feel very strongly about is that I had very good male role models. I had excellent ones. My dad, first and foremost, my both of my grandfathers were became excellent men by the time that I was born. I don't know about how excellent they were when I was not existing, but my dad very much was emphatic about telling me while he was alive that the father that raised him is very different from the father that is helping to raise us, that he changed so much as a man. My dad was a son, the uh, fourth son, the youngest child of Jamaican immigrants. And his family was put under a lot of stress and duress his entire childhood, being mixed race in a country that at the time hated Black people and hated the idea of mixed people in general and also immigrants in general. Um, and he had my Mimi has always been his mother, extremely hardworking. And he told me, he's like, my father's brilliant, but he was floundering all the time. So angry, so resentful, so fearful. And he took it out on us as kids. And it wasn't until he got a granddaughter that so much of his life changed. So much.
Because he
And
had four boys, right?
he had four boys.
Okay, yeah.
Mm. Was responsible for four young men. And he was also a missionary and a deacon in the Baptist church. And so I'm the third
Woof.
oldest of 13 cousins. His first uh grandchild was a granddaughter. And my dad said something in him changed immediately and he started to apologize to his sons. for the way he treated us. And he said he never really knew why or what, but my dad said to us kids growing up that he would be a much better father than his dad ever was. And he was. I had a great dad. I really did. And so his loss is felt even worse because I had such a great dad. My dad was a provider, protector, but he didn't just provide money, he provided a listening ear. I could come to my dad with any problem at all, and he would just listen. And then he would ask me, like as a little kid, do you need a solution or do you need to cry? More often than not, I'd be like, I need to cry. I just need to be held. And he would hold me. He was a very big, giant man, very overweight, and he was safe to come to. Like, he would tell you his opinions. I didn't agree with him half the time, but I respected him because he allowed me to be myself. And he also enabled me to be myself. I never really felt judged by my dad, even if he didn't agree with me. And I think because I had such a well-adjusted father, that I became a more well-adjusted person empathetically, because my dad was abundantly empathetic to his entire community. He was a data recovery specialist and IT consultant, and everyone would come to him for anything, problems, and he would fix them, but also enable them to fix their own problems, to solve their own issues. And I think whenever I think of men, I think of my dad. And so once I got out into, the real world without my dad, and I only had a year in the real world without my dad before his terrible accident that eventually took his life, I started to recognize that men were not safe like my dad was safe. I was very, very trusting, extremely so. And I was told all the time by my dad of how to defend myself physically, but it was never out of fear. It was like me and my dad just like jostling with each other. Like I remember one time I was angry at him at 15 and I kicked him like square in the shins and he was like, that hurt. You don't kick people in the shins because you're angry at them. Like, but I didn't get punished for it. He was like, I didn't teach you to not kick people in the shins. This is a me issue as a parent. Let me rectify that.
Mm.
And I went through an unsafe situation and my dad was incapacitated in the hospital and all I wanted was my dad. All I wanted was my dad and I didn't have him anymore. And that unsafe situation led to a very unsafe relationship, which led to me getting further and further abused. And I had no one to turn to because my dad was incapacitated in a coma in the hospital. My grandfather had a stroke, and then my other grandfather had a stroke, and then they were taken out one by one by one. And it was very devastating because of the purity culture in which I was raised. When I tried to speak about it to my mother, who was never a safe person to begin with, it just led to me being more and more isolated and more judged. And when I tried to talk to my male friends about it, they judged me too. And we're like, well, why did you put yourself in that situation? And I
Mm-hmm.
was taken aback by that judgment because I had never had that example in the men that raised me. And it really opened my eyes to how advanced, how like, I really was disadvantaged in some ways because I was so trusting. And then I really was privileged in other ways because I had such good male role models to trust. And I think that high standard of providing, whenever I think about it, I don't think about monetary, but I think about like having a safe place for other people to come to you, like that leadership role. I think so many men are lacking because they want to be heroes, but they don't want the responsibility of the hero. What do you think about that?
Oh, dear God. There's 12 different threads that you talked about. I didn't even know where we were going with that. There were so many things. I'm like, oh, there's so much we have in common and then all that. So, okay. Um, the hero complex, is such a destructive piece of culture, um, that is everywhere in media. And one of the things that is really hard for me now is to go back and watch so many things that when I was younger, I thought they were just the best things in the world. And to see it and be everything from how it's infantilizing, women, or what the men were doing was not really in any way, shape, or form heroic, quote unquote, or putting men on a pedestal in a way that they're going to solve the problems. And, as somebody who's now writing a script for a movie and looking at all the tropes of all those things, I look back at it now and just it's amazing what I thought of any of these things. And, the damsel in distress and that's what we're supposed to be. And it's so much because there's so many things that are ignored that are important, about reality. And when that's the only message that so many of us get, uh, I didn't have a strong relationship in my life as a model. My mom was single the entire time that I was growing up. She only dated somebody after I was out of the house, and I never even met that guy. She never spoke about my father ever, not once to anybody. I think I mentioned that. And kind of to your point, that was interesting. Since I got sober, I have found out that my dad is Afro-Jamaican. So that was something that I didn't know. And I'm a very white presenting, like 40% of me is that. My dad also had some Irish in him too. And to find and meet some of the other side of my family and be like, wow, I have like my cousin Terrence is a black man. And didn't realize when I was growing up all these things that I can now kind of see in my own face, the things that I learned to hate because of that, and what I learned to not find appealing in others. Um, that's something for later. But I didn't have anybody that I looked up to as a hero until I started martial arts. And then even to look back on that now, I'm just like, that's not really what I want to be as a man either. It was all about it's all about violence. There's so much that we put a prop on a pedestal that is every superhero is violent. All this is all around domination in some sort, even if it's dominating who we have deemed evil. And so that ends up being what I am going to model myself after. I'm going to be somebody that is strong and powerful, as if that is where my value comes from. And I'm going to be able to physically dominate someone, and I'm going to be able to do all these things. And that is not what I should want to be, and I have no desire to be a hero. I think that is as dehumanizing as anything else. Putting celebrities and other people up on a pedestal, especially when it's people that we love. Like everyone loves Pedro Pascal right now. And there's memes that are going around saying, if we find out that he sucks or he's done something wrong, like he's not perfect, he's human too. Keanu Reeves he's made some mistakes. Every human does. Saying that we have to be perfect is one of the core parts of the patriarchy that keeps us grinding and wanting to perform and putting us in stressful situations where it's causing so much harm. The hero complex has got to go, and we've just got to be more realistic about what these things are. We can appreciate them for what they are, and guess what? None of us are Aragorn. It's not going to happen. Aragorn's an Aragorn.
Hmm. I really agree with that it's yeah, everybody does love Pedro Pascal. I love him too.
Same.
Can't deny it. Um,
Who
and then I
doesn't?
think about Robert Downey Jr., who really had that comeback story and really became beloved but he went through so much.
Yeah.
And
And cause so
from
much pain.
exactly, went through
Yeah.
so much pain and he transmuted it into purpose and learned and grew and became someone worthy of acclaim. I think that's what so many of us desire is to be recognized and noticed for our achievements and to have some sort of praise or affirmation. And so many of us look for it in all the wrong places because of what is modeled to us as positive acclaim. You were talking about your sobriety, and I think you hinted to, drinking to feel something or to fit in. Is that true?
That's part of it. I mean, it was to numb everything else. It was to numb all the stuff. It was to quiet everything up here that I was constantly dealing with because I wasn't taking care of my neurodivergency or my mental illnesses or the trauma or everything else that goes along with that. Because I wasn't I think it's Tim Ferriss who said, um, you know, you're not dealing with it, but you're dealing with it. You're not directly dealing with it, but it's showing up everywhere. And yeah, that's definitely that was definitely it. Anything I could do to make the pain less. And I think that it's inherently human to try and find the next thing that I can grab onto that's going to allow me to feel less of what is the weight of the world now? How are all of us not nobody was talking about genocides a few years ago, and now people are aware that there is somewhat near a half dozen of them going on in the world. How are we just supposed to go back to work after that? Like this election just happened, and I'm just supposed to go back to a Christmas party and pretend like everything's fine. All this stuff that's going on where there is the existential crisis of so much is happening all the time, and I just have to go in and pretend like it matters. The metrics on this thing matter, or I've got to do a training course for HubSpot. Like, how does that matter with everything that's happening? And that's what it would do. I would just do and utilize anything that was around me to get me through the day when it was all faking. And especially as a DJ, my whole thing was to be a performer. That was my whole value. Not just the mask of masculinity, the performance that is so much a part of this, and also the mask of masking from neurodivergency to pretend like I'm a normal human, but putting those masks on and then showing up and like I am Mr. Go-To, I am Mr. Party. It is just no, I am not always like that. I'm very rarely like that. But the drugs and the alcohol allowed me to get away and put all that in the back of my head and perform. And yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a vehicle to step away from all the inner turmoil.
Hmm. I think that's interesting pointing it out as a way to cope with stressors because personally, I don't think I've ever really been drunk. And I'm only 24, right? I refused to have alcohol till I turned 21 because I'm stubborn as hell. And I was like, I'm not going to do it until it's legal because that was the type of person that I was. Very high and mighty, very thought of myself as better. And I just didn't drink alcohol till I turned 21. And then once I did have it, I was like, why does everybody make this out to be such a great thing? I don't understand it. I just really didn't understand. And still to this day, I've been tipsy, I've felt the effects, but it's not something that I can really comprehend in a way of how addictive alcohol is to some people or how addictive numbing that pain can be because it's not something that I have experienced. And it's really interesting for me to hear it because the way that you describe it, I'm like, I don't ever want to experience that. I don't want to ever experience that grief, because what it sounds like to me is grief.
Hmm. No, it was freeing.
It was
It was the
freeing.
opposite. It was opposite. It was while under the influence, there is no medication, there is no therapy, there is nothing that's even come close to the freedom of being a certain level of drunk or high, where all the shit that I've been suffering with forever is I am now in the moment, I am here. And
Mm.
it's a freedom from the existential crisis. I'm not saying anybody should do it. It is not the answer. Part of being alive is being an exposed nerve. Like, all the feelings are okay. None of them are bad. It's okay for me to feel anger and sadness, and accepting those things was a huge part of my recovery in any number of ways. But the world teaching toxic positivity and that I should always feel good and always be positive, I relished in the fact that I'm not feeling well. It allowed me to become a public speaker. I was terrified of public speaking, but give me 6 shots in a line and give me a microphone, and I am the man. Like, I'll go on stage and, I rocked it out. I've had thousands of people in a crowd in front of me and some famous, music artist or somebody from reality TV show beside of me, and we're doing all this stuff. Again, Girls Gone Wild and everything. I had the life. Like, I lived it was at some point I'll write a book, and at one point it was called The Greatest Job in the World, and that was still every guy I knew wanted to have my job because I was a strip club DJ. I made a shit ton of money. I worked in bars. I was always around beautiful women. I was always drinking, always doing drugs, had nice clothes, had a big house, could do anything I wanted to whenever I wanted to. And that's freeness of what I felt whenever I was under the influence allowed me to believe in the illusion of what I was thinking was what mattered, and it didn't. And so many of us did it. It's not just me. Like, I am not different. Almost everybody in that. There's very few people that I think will talk about being in sex work, whether or not it is the women, men, people that are part of the actual sex part of sex work, but separately the people that surround that. Um, I was emotionally, spiritually, sexually, physically abused growing up. And most of the people that I met in that atmosphere that were men were the same way. And certainly it was the majority of the women that I met. And the drinking and drugging for me, I don't know about you, but I learned that peer pressure wasn't somebody's going to force me to do anything. It's that the people that I want to be around are going to be doing something that I don't feel comfortable doing, and I'm going to be left out. You don't want to smoke the joint, you don't want to drink, you don't want to do a line, you feel uncomfortable about it. That's perfectly fine. We'll see you tomorrow. And all these cool people. And this comes from, I went from the losers made fun of, that I quit high school, faked my high school's graduation. My mom died not even knowing this. And within a few years, I ended up working at the local strip club that opened up. The guy that had done a number of things with us when I was in martial arts, taught me how to DJ. All of a sudden, I felt so comfortable because I could just be who I was, because everybody there was a quote unquote outcast of some sort. And all these things that being a believer in God for so long had kept me, I've been, oh, you can't do that. Like, don't listen to rock music. Don't listen to rap music. Sex is bad. Nudity is bad. All these things are terrible. Now I'm just completely immersed in it. And these people accept me and loved me the way that I was. I had a community, and all of them were drinking, smoking weed, doing drugs. Most of them were doing all these things. And so I am underage, and it's cool. I'm working at the cool club. I can do whatever I want to do. And I'm the guy with the microphone. And very quickly, my career took off, and those people became my family. I had never had a group of friends like that, and people that cared about me and showed up for me. I found community. And part of being in that community, if I wanted to be around it all the time, was the rock star lifestyle. And so I went all in. Within the first couple of years. I had all my piercings, all the tattoos that I've got now, drinking and partying all the time, wearing suits, all this shit. And I started to conform to what everybody else there was, and it cut off pieces of myself. And I had said there's all these things that I didn't want to be because of somebody that had been bullied and been these things. And now I chose to be a part of that and say, all right, if this is what a man's supposed to be, I'm going to do this thing. And it just got every year I cut off a little bit more of myself and a little bit more of myself until I was so far removed that I was the personality. I was the DJ persona that I had created. I was no longer me pretending to be that. That was me all the time. And to look in the mirror and just be like, what the fuck happened? And to then have everything that was supposed to be success. Like here it all is. I've got a pile of money. I can do whatever I want to. Why am I not happy? Why do I still feel miserable? Thought this was supposed to be the answer, and it just absolutely wasn't. So people like Anthony Bourdain and so many people talk about their experiences with drugs and alcohol, and then he would talk about it later in his life. It's like, at what point did you hear me tell this story about the stuff that I was doing that it sounded like a good idea to you? I was telling you that I was smoking crack and I was on heroin, I was stealing stuff from people. Like I was doing bad things. I had to recover my humanity. That's what I'm trying to get back. I'm trying to remember who I was. And part of it is getting away from all that. It feels good and glamorous at the time, but going back on it's like I would never do that if I had the chance. I would much rather replace the drugs and alcohol with, therapy and an Adderall prescription and men's work. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's that's a beautiful recovery journey of being like, yeah, this was all really cool, but it I became somebody that I wasn't, and I was embraced by a lot of people, but they weren't embracing me for me. They were embracing me for the things that the world saw as an outcast. And it it makes me think of when I was working um, in a restaurant as a hostess, and the atmosphere is like, oh, we're a family, but it was a toxic family.
Yeah.
And it everyone was feeding on each other's toxicity and enabling really bad choices and really bad behavior, like sleeping with each other. And some of them had families, and it was a lot. And they were like, oh, Grace, come to our parties. And I was like, no, no, thank you. And they're like, what? Do you think you're too good for us? Are you not a part of the family? I'm like, what do you mean, not a part of the family? Y'all are not my family. This is where I work. This is not my
Mm.
family. And they got very angry at me for saying that to them. And one guy, like, he said he needed a ride home and he lived in my apartment complex. And so I dropped him off at his apartment, and then I parked my car and started walking to my apartment, and he followed me into my house. And I'm like terrified. My roommates were not home. So I did not go into my room because I was like, I'm not letting him know which one is my room because I do not feel safe in this circumstance. And I had my service dog Gigi with me, and I was like, okay, Gigi has a command. If I need to use it, Gigi can do what she needs to do. And he went into my fridge and he saw I had a can of whipped cream. He's like, why do you have a can of whipped cream? And I was like, well, puppuccinos, obviously. Give Gigi her little whipped cream shots. And he stabs a hole in it, and then he does whip it in my kitchen right in front of me. And I'm shooketh. I'm like, what is going on? What are you doing? And he's like, it's a whippet. Do you want to try some? I'm like, fuck no. What are you doing in my kitchen?
Yeah.
What is happening? And he's like, how much was the whipped cream? I'm like, I don't know, $3. He's like, I'll owe you $3 tomorrow. Okay, see you later. And he left with my whipped cream canister. I did not go back to work. Never went back there. Never went back there. Moved out of that apartment a month later. I just did not feel safe. And
Mm.
I still can't comprehend that whole atmosphere, that the enmeshment with everybody in that Joe's Crab Shack. Everybody in that Joe's Crab Shack. Very enmeshed.
Super fun.
Very,
Definitely know Joe's Crab Shacks. Been to those before, yeah.
yeah. It's just like, it was so strange and a very odd behavior that I didn't comprehend, but now as I'm older, because I was like 19 at the time, I'm like, girl, what the hell did you experience? Like, what the hell? And I feel bad for that kid. I do feel bad for that kid. Because for him to think that that was okay, I can't imagine what other things he's gone through in his life. For him to think that that was okay.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that became abundantly clear to me, and was always kind of there was being in that industry. I'll go with the adult nightclub industry in my case, but it doesn't mean it wasn't bars and it wasn't everything else around it. Because I saw it at all the late night bars and stuff that I went to, is that we heavily normalized things that are absolutely wrong elsewhere. The things that I was the actions, the stuff that I was saying and doing that caused harm to others was stuff that I was saying on a microphone every night. It's part of my job. Like it is very much a part of that atmosphere where people like they talk down to each other, they make fun of each other. It's just stuff that cannot be said or done in the quote unquote real world. And being around that for 20 years, nearly 20 years, it is difficult to be around it now that I've stepped back from it, but none of that mattered at the time. It was just the fact that I had, 19 years old, I finally had somewhere where I fit. And here's money. I didn't know what I was going to do. I quit high school, didn't have a high school diploma, didn't have a degree, didn't know what I was going to do. And now I'm making 6 months into it. I'm making more money than my mom was making 20 something years into a career. And it's something that I know people that are making an unbelievable amount of money doing this. Well, I mean, just like tons and tons of money. And it's a career path. And I thought that was going to be the thing that I was going to do forever. And I walked away from it at the peak of my career where I could really start to get to the point where I could just pick my job. I can go to any city I want to probably and make money. And it was an illusion. It was none of that had any sort of, not to me anyway. Plenty of people that I know and care about still very much love it, but that wasn't what I wanted from my life. And I got into it because it was a way out, and simply because for the first time in my life I felt connection. And it sounds like you had a little bit of this where you were at. We let so much go. Tonight's my night to fuck up and getting in trouble, and tomorrow is going to be somebody else. So I'm going to be made fun of tomorrow at work early on, and by the end of the night, somebody else is going to be the person that's caused issues. And it was constantly something. And there were so many traumatic things that happened. I had somebody quite literally die in my arms. I had a teenage kid. I was emceeing at the club that I was at. This is a generally safe club. Some guy got fucked up and stabbed this kid. And I don't know what's happening. I'm walking back and forth between the nightclub and the club that I was at, the gentleman's club that was next door, just checking on what was going on. And I see this huge crowd of people outside, and my friend's on the ground with him in his arms, with his kid in his arms. And because I did martial arts for a long time, there were certain things we had to do before we got our black belt, and one of those was like CPR and a couple other different things. And so I hop the ground, and I'm trying to help my buddy Tall, who has also since in a car accident died, which was another really difficult thing that I had to deal with. This kid is not going to make it. I can tell by where the stab wound is, everything else. And so I just sit with this kid until the light goes out in his eyes, basically. And it was all these people around him. This kid's name was DJ, and everybody referred to me as DJ. So there's this crowd of people. Everybody's yelling DJ. I'm like, I don't know what the hell everybody's yelling my name, because all these people just saw me inside on the stage with a microphone. That was the kid's name. And it was just one of those brutal things. And I got a phone call the next day from the owner to see how I was doing, and I was at work the next night. The guy that one of the people that helped me become a DJ died of a heroin overdose. And the next night, me and one of his other best friends, who were the two DJs that worked there, both of us were there the next night. And both nights it was like, let's get fucked up and get through this. And that is part of the industry. It's
Mm,
just keep going no matter what happens. I can't tell you how many overdoses or
mm,
like drunk driving accidents. Somebody's almost died, and we just keep going like nothing has happened. It is a desensitizing and dehumanizing way of experiencing life. And it is like it's every rock star. it's every behind the music that you've ever seen. Well, that was probably before your time. I think that was like a 90s thing, but anyway. Yeah.
I mean, and that makes me so devastated for you and for all of those people in that industry. I mean, you mentioned helping other men through your experiences. What kind of support or resources do you offer them if you had a young man come up to you, say, that was like, say, a little version of you
Mm.
who was living this lifestyle and starts to recognize that maybe this isn't what he wants? How would you help him out with that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think, one of the big things is that I lived what is most men's biggest fear. And that is, I was, canceled for the things that I was doing. And for what most men would be like, that's really not that big of a deal. What you said wasn't that big of a deal. There was a number of people in my life, didn't matter their gender, that said the same thing. They're like, I don't really get this. And um, some that obviously did, that were righteously angry about what had happened. And a lot of that I feel as I've learned more, especially as I've gotten to the feminism side of things, is this is a lifetime experience for women of feeling unsafe around men. And to live through that and say, most guys understand that they have done something when they were younger or are currently doing it that is harming the people around them, and they are just accepting it. A lot of people find comfort in some of the people that are in power in the US right now, because, and especially there's the manosphere, there's all this other stuff that's going on with, the emergence of maladaptive masculinity as the proper form of masculinity. Like, get back to being a traditional man. Like, this is, yeah, like this is what it's supposed to be. Put women in their place and all of that. And that is not the answer to any of their problems. As somebody who was bullied, somebody who was abused, somebody who was locked into closets, as somebody who then said, I'm going to go and be these things, I can say for sure that that was not the answer. And emancipating men from this idea that that we need to dominate in order to have a place in this world is core to everyone healing. Because if I were to go back and tell me, it would be like, there is so much you don't know or understand about yourself. Let me tell you about what you're doing now. And you're traveling the world, you've seen these things, you've done all these things, and you can't imagine any of this. None of this makes sense to you. You might not even be interested in the stuff that I'm telling you that you do. And you're going to look back on what you're doing now and think that none of this really matters. And it's going to take a really low point for you to feel that way. And so for other men that show up, the best thing that I can do is be honest about my own experiences. And then whenever they ask me, like, wow, I can just see that there's a piece to you, or there's this way that you show up that I don't know how to show up as. It's not like I knew how to do it. There's no way to Google and find resources immediately for what is inappropriate behavior. Like, if men are doing and saying and acting on things that they were taught to do as young boys, and now there's the Me Too movement and saying that what this is wrong, and stop objectifying people, stop harming people, stop harassing people, stop assaulting people, and understanding what those things are. Most men are going to be afraid to even Google that to see what it is. Do you, as a guy talking to another guy, do you know what sexual harassment is? Do you know the definition of it? You yelling at a girl about how this part of her body is harassment. Like, you just grabbed a girl's ass walking through the middle of a nightclub. That's assault. She doesn't fucking know who you are, dude. And these things are propped up in movies and rape culture. It is difficult to sit and watch, and I won't even watch it anymore, to go back and think that I was in a theater full of people laughing at the American Pie movies and to see what was going on. They broadcast a naked image of this. I mean, it's a movie still, but they're broadcasting naked images of this woman across the internet. That is a felony now. Like there's so many things that were funny and taught to be this is what men can be and should do. And for us to step back and realize, like you talked about it a little bit earlier with the first granddaughter, that it's unfortunate that this has to be a step for most men, is that they have to have a woman in their lives that they really care about for them to see women as human beings. It's sometimes it's a daughter, sometimes it's a wife, oftentimes it's they're teenagers. We might say it about other women, but if four men are sitting at a bar and an attractive bartender or waitress or whatever comes up, all four boys sitting at the table will probably say something about the way she looks. But as soon as one of those guys says, that's my sister, that's my cousin, or whatever, all the guys stop. And they'll be like, my bad, man, I'm sorry. They're not apologizing or sad that they said something about her. They're sorry about the fact that they harmed the man that's in the group, somebody that they have value, given value to. And it's not just inherently her that has value that they should be showing that not courtesy, just general human kindness to. And so just to get through all of this, like what you said, why'd you say that? What makes you think that? Just to question it, because so much of culture is calling out culture. And one of the big things with this men's work is calling in, or what a man that was the first to call me and help me out, talked about being called forth. Like I see more in you. You're accountable for what you did. I know there's more to it. Are you going to meetings? Because you got a lot of shit to talk about. And you need to go and deal with the stuff that's going on there. And how can I help you? Because I've been there. I've done this. I've had to get sober. I've had to do this. I've had to do that. Having somebody do that, people isolating me and keeping me away from everything, that was not helpful. It was harmful. Of course it was, but that's what we all know to do. Someone's done harm, so let's isolate them, and that in some way they need to have everything taken away from them. And the people that were there and said, what you did was harmful and it sucks, and you need to figure out why you're showing up like that. And having that ability to have a circle of men where I can be called forth, called in, or they can tell me about what's going on with me is a space to do that. And doing that for others, I think, is really important. And that's why healthy masculinity, not the red pill manosphere entertain bullshit, is what we got to get away from, and having a space where we can be really intense and talk about the stuff that matters the most and the things that we struggle through is so important.
Speaking directly to our listeners, what would be your message about healing and becoming a better person?
Mm, that with healing, it's never arriving, and it's become a buzzword for everybody's talking about healing. Everybody's talking about that. A part of the human experience is the mistakes that we make, but find methods to get real and honest in spaces where that is allowed so that before those mistakes go too far, where is this just drinking a little bit or is this a problem? That there's people that you feel safe with and you can be a safe space for them to talk about what's going on with you and for them, and learn to connect with it. Don't be afraid of feelings. Feelings aren't good or bad, they just are. And learning how to properly express those things is important. And don't be scared of the idea of having trauma or having mental illness. Get away from the fear of all those things and realize that some of this is just part of being human. It is inherently human, and it's okay to deal with those things, but we have to heal our wounds so those wounds don't bleed on to others. And that is the best thing we can do for those that we love. I can't make the world a better place if I haven't figured out how to own my own shit, my own stuff, and that I don't have people that can help me to see it when I don't. So, yeah.
That's very beautiful. Do you have any resources or recommendations that you'd like to close out with?
Oh, yeah. If so, the one thing for many men is us coming to grips with that we may be causing harm. And it's hard to Google and find that there's a space for that. And men's work programs are such a place to be able to reconnect with ourselves and talk about the stuff and be seen. The world, for many good reasons, women in particular, people of color, queer folks, for many reasons, the traditional male can be a scary thing to approach. Having other men to talk about our stuff and figure our stuff out is important. So find men's work groups, find the healthy masculinity ones, find the ones that are anti-patriarchy and have feminist values that are going to bring out different ways of thinking where you can challenge what and how you see the world. Hey Brother Co is an organization that I'm part of, which is how I met Grace's fiance. The big one for me was the Mankind Project. I just wrapped up a program called Success Stories, where literally everybody in that group are men that used to be incarcerated and have some of them were serving life sentences. And these are men that are fundamentally have done the deep work to go from gang members, former people that were white supremacists that have broke all that stuff down and said, where did that come from? And I can't ever show up like that again. These resources that are out there, find a space so you can reconnect with yourself and ask yourself the big questions, because I think so many of us sit with the fact that we know something with how we're showing up could be better.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. My Mochi and my Gigi are like looking at me like we have to pee.
I saw it like you were muted. It's like, is she saying something? Did I not?
I'm
Did I
trying
miss
to
it? I
like
don't
tell them to stop. Here, you can see them. Here's Mochi.
What's going on?
Mochi, come here. Say hello. And then
Hi,
Gigi
Mochi.
is my service dog. She has the pink tail. Gigi, come here.
Oh, I can see the little bit of the pink.
Yeah, she's looking
She's
out.
not having it.
She's wanting to come here, Gigi. Come say hi to Ron. Gigi, look
Hi,
up.
Gigi.
Say hello.
Hi there. I like
She's
that
my good
necklace.
girl.
Oh.
But yeah, these are my children, and then I have two cats. I got Lucy and Loki, but they're looking at me like we have to pee. We have to pee. Thank you, Ron. Thank you so much for sharing. Where can we find you on the internet so that we can follow your journey?
I mean, I don't really have much right now. I used to have a big social media presence, but for very obvious reasons, I don't have that much anymore. So, I'm at the Recovery Nomad on Instagram, and I would say really more so than me to just to go follow the organizations that are doing the great work and talking about this stuff. Hey Brother Co on Instagram. I get to work with the Mankind Project Ontario, so Mankind Project Ontario on Instagram, and I get to talk to these other men that are doing the work. Success Stories, which is present feminism on Instagram. Follow their stuff. That is the place to get a lot of what I just shared in probably far more articulate and succinct ways. So, highly recommend those.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ron, and for being vulnerable and open on the podcast. I truly appreciate it, and I am very inspired by your journey. And it's awesome to see a fellow mixed human that not many
Yes.
people see as mixed. We are mixed.
Yeah.
We should embrace it in our culture and create that culture. Mochi says that she loves you. She's a little gremlin. She keeps jumping up on
I'm
my lap.
Mochi. I love you too, Mochi.
She's looking like,
Oh, somebody else loves me. Does that mean I get treats?
yes, exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much, Ron.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. At the end of every episode, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new feeling and how it correlates to trauma. Let's spin this wheel, shall we? All right. Ooh, ah, a wheel. Ooh, it landed. It landed on scared, terrified, frightened. The fight, flight, freeze, fawn response whenever we're going through trauma. is a way for our bodies to keep us alive. When it pertains to what we were talking about with Ron today, about how he was essentially canceled and he felt some fear. He felt scared about his future, about what was going to happen. And instead of being frozen in that fear, instead of letting that fear become negative and cause further harm, he used that fear in a very positive way. When I look at this wheel, I don't really see negative or positive emotions. And if we look at emotions as negative or positive, that's really holding us back and limiting our potential for growth and also understanding. When I look at fear, it's just a natural human response to something else. Fear informs us that something is wrong, or that we have done something wrong, or that something wrong is happening to us. We can feel fear even when nothing is going wrong because of heightened anxiety. Stress can really kill you. And something that I really want to share with all of my listeners out there is that when you're feeling fear, instead of, if it's like life or death circumstance, get the fuck out, right? But if you're feeling fear about, say, a text message or a work conference or something that isn't super high stakes, I want to recommend that you take a step back from it for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and allow yourself to breathe and feel that fear. Allow yourself to feel it. Allow your body to go through that process and try to regulate yourself back to a normal state of being. It will allow you to, number one, be able to feel those feelings. And then number two, be able to fully comprehend what the actual situation is so that you can make a better decision based on the situation. It really does help. I promise it really does. It helps me out a lot too. I get text messages all the time that cause me very anxious, baby girl. I'm like, don't know what to do. Once I take that step back, reevaluate, then I can make a good decision based on the circumstances and make a more informed decision so that I can better take care of myself and everybody else around me. Thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And for those of us that shared in the previous Discord Confessions episode with Catlin, I really appreciate it. If you guys want to support the podcast, we have a Patreon. Different tiers can get you a bracelet. That's a handmade bracelet made by me, Grace, or you can get a sticker like the one on the back of my computer. Those links are in our description. Any support helps us out a lot. So if you feel compelled to, please like, subscribe, comment down below what you liked about this episode, and share the show with your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for being here. Remember, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise again from the ashes and be filled with peace, hope, love, joy, and understanding. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Happy 2025. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.